Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about what is going on in Hartford, Connecticut, because a group of individuals that are affiliated with the church have turned vigilante, even though they don't call themselves that, in efforts to combat increasing crime in that area. And by the way, what we're talking about in terms of Hartford appears to be mostly an increase in property crime, carjackings, and whatnot. However, there are additional problems associated with the area. Now, we're going to get into this. We're going to break this down. We're going to have fun, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who signed up over on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
And to remind you that on Saturday, April 27th, I will be at Austin, Texas at the Vulcan Gas Company for Minds Fest. Link to tickets in the top of the description.
We're patrolling the neighborhood.
Hartford's Armed Self-Defense Brigade made the first of their community patrols Saturday morning on Garden Street. More than 24 people took to the streets armed with the mission.
We're cleaning up the community.
To clean the streets of both trash and crime.
So right off the bat, I do love the spirit of this group because not only are they patrolling, trying to deter crime, which I think is a good thing, especially in an area where they voted to defund the police because, you know, that's been a genius idea all across the country. Definitely got to implement it in Connecticut, but they're also going out of their way to clean up the streets, literally removing litter from there, because what they're trying to show is that people do care about their community, and this has an impact. Again, a big component of broken windows policing is the fact that when you leave an area dilapidated and it looks like nobody cares about it, people will act like nobody cares about that specific area. That draws in criminality, and yes, it is another way that environment can impact behavior. On top of that, they're going out of their way to ensure all of their members that want to carry a firearm do so legally under Connecticut's firearm laws, and that is the first thing that they taught people to do in their lesson related to this.
We are tired of the crime and the violence.
The first Armed Neighborhood Watch began with the presentation about Connecticut's gun laws and what's needed to be legally armed.
Look, I gotta say, from top to bottom, so far, I love everything about this group, their energy, and why they're out in the streets, and more importantly, the fact that they are out trying to clean up their own streets. We see so many black political figures, black religious leaders that get way more attention from the national media, blaming all the problems in these black neighborhoods on evil white racism, redlining, all the way back to slavery and all these other issues. But these people right here are taking accountability for what's going on in their own neighborhood. They're trying to clean it up, both metaphorically and literally, and I really genuinely appreciate that. But the thing is, they're up against a bit of a hurdle because just 6 months prior to this, there was a local news segment that was discussing some of the problems with specifically the juvenile reforms to Connecticut's criminal justice system. And I think this is an absolute disaster.
It angers me because of the harm that our officers and our residents innocently were put in by the hands of these repeat offenders, these criminals that should not be on the street.
Strong words from Meriden leadership after 6 arrests were made following a 2-day crime spree.
Whatever we're doing is not working, and we need immediate change.
But it's not just law enforcement sounding alarm bells. Some state legislators saying Connecticut laws need to change.
There were the best of intentions when the juvenile justice reforms were done, but clearly we need to go back and take a look at these things again.
Now, the thing that they're focusing on in that segment from 6 months ago, and by the way, they kind of reference in the Vigilante segment, is the fact that the juvenile reforms, specifically the more recent juvenile reforms, seem to have been a disaster for the state of Connecticut because rather than give young kids a chance, give them a break, they're treating multiple time offenders, juvenile offenders, as if they are first time offenders. And by the way, it's going to get worse as we go through this, but I just want you to understand how Connecticut is a little bit different than most states in the union, because in the state of Connecticut, in general, as a blanket rule, juvenile offenders under the age of 16 are not considered responsible for their own actions. Now, that is very different than not being tried as an adult, which is common in other places across the country. In fact, according to the Connecticut law, juvenile offenders are never convicted of any particular crime. Again, unless there are serious violent crimes that are the exception to the rule, they can only be adjudged delinquent because their system is based on reform first. And to be clear, On its surface, I'm not against this, but the devil is always in the details. I happen to think that youthful offenders do get second chances, do get more chances, because there's a difference between adults and children, and that should be reflected to a certain extent in our laws. However, when you don't recognize repeat offenders, people with a propensity towards crime, and you don't dole out consequences for those individuals even after they repeat offend, and the number of crimes that you can actually convict somebody of, not just adjudge them delinquent, is so low, and it doesn't include Grand Theft Auto, you're going to run into a lot of problems, especially when a very popular trend happens to be the Kia Boys trend, where people break in and easily are able to start a Kia, take it on joyrides, and all the problems we've seen associated with that across this entire nation. Now again, according to Connecticut law, you can only be adjudged delinquent, and it says any person, agency, or government official may file a written complaint with the court alleging a child's delinquency. The court may take no action on the complaint, refer the matter to another agency, handle it non-judicially, or request that a delinquency petition be filed and then dispose of the matter judicially. A non-judicial disposition may include any practical treatment of the child, including a dismissal with a warning, restitution, or supervision for up to 3 months. If the court handles the matter judicially and finds the child delinquent, again, you can't convict, you can't find them guilty because you're not assigning accountability. Available sentencing options include treatment for drug and alcohol dependency where appropriate, or services like mental or physical deficiencies. Now look, it's one thing to say that you want to give children a chance. It's one thing to say, you know what, it's a non-violent crime, nobody got hurt during the course of the crime, it's a first-time offense, we're going to refer you to counseling or some program, we may have some kind of supervision. By the way, the 3 months of supervision seems very arbitrary, but we're going to give you a chance, and if you don't repeat offend, then we'll just roll with that, and we're going to expunge it from your record, and hopefully you become a productive member of society. However, unfortunately, what's happening in the state of Connecticut is that they give them this chance, then they repeat offend, and then they have to give them that chance again.
Quinn says current juvenile and repeat offender policies aren't working.
When you make a mistake the first time, you probably should be dealt with differently than a repeat offender. What the problem is we're treating too many repeat offenders the same way as we're treating first-time offenders.
Republican lawmakers agree.
It's demonstrating quite clearly that Connecticut is not capable of keeping our community safe.
Because as long as they never commit a crime that raises to the level of a serious violent felony, you never even have the option of trying this person as an adult, of actually convicting them. And again, even that is very subjective, and you have a lot of these left-wing politicians that have no interest in pushing forward on the adult trial, even for the crimes that would qualify. So what that results in is a similar situation as to what we saw with the Kia Boys in that documentary by Tommy G, where these guys know for a fact that they're not going to get any jail time. In Milwaukee, they were only going to get a couple of weeks, so they continually repeat offend, and it becomes a culture of criminality.
Safety a top priority for lawmakers next session.
When we reconvene in February, I will be introducing legislation again to crack down on the repeat offenders.
And to be fair to the Connecticut legislature, including the Democrats in the Connecticut legislature and the governor and a bunch of mayors in the area, they want reforms to this particular system. That's what they were fighting for 6 months ago. This idea that you can't even get repeat juvenile offenders incarcerated, lock them up, get them sentenced due to these recent reforms has been a disaster. They recognize it and they're wanting to change it. However, there is a woke left-wing lobbying group that is pushing on the other side. And unfortunately, like in many of these states, these people are not only outside the government, they are embedded in the government. So while you do have legislators and mayors coming together and thinking that this is a disastrous policy, we made critical errors defunding our police, you have people like Christina Quaranta, the executive director of the CT Justice Alliance, discussing their organization's legislative priorities regarding youth crime. And you will not be surprised to find out that they're not trying to reform the system in any way that would be positive, but they are pushing for reform. reforms.
In recent years, teenage crime here in Connecticut has been a major concern for police departments and mayors alike. One example, car thefts, spurred by a post on TikTok, led to a string of thefts of Hyundais and Kias across our state, and that actually continues today. In fact, Naugatuck reported that problem reemerged this week there. So during the last legislative session, Hartford Mayor Luke Bronin proposed sentencing reform for repeat offenders, including juveniles. It was signed, that proposal, by mayors and police chiefs across the state. But should we continue in that vein? My guest this morning has other ideas about what to do about teenage crime and the justice system.
Now, I will link this interview in the description of this video. It also will come with a transcript of the interview if you want to read it for yourself, hear it for yourself. It's totally fine, whatever your preference is. But what I found fascinating is that the first question that was asked to this woman who advocates for juvenile offenders is that they're trying to push these reforms for offenders under the age of 18. Now, you would think this would be a very simple question, something very straightforward for somebody who's advocating for juvenile offenders. But guess what? She has a different definition of juvenile offenders. It's actually, for her, offenders under the age of 25.
So first up, one of the goals of your organization is to try to change the way people under the age of 18 are dealt with when they get into the judicial system. What do you would like to see changed?
That's correct. And we're actually now focusing on under 25.
Under 25.
Yep.
Okay, I thought it was 18 at first,
okay.
but 25 is changed.
But in this conversation, under 18 applies in terms of, what we're talking about today.
And then she tries to make the case that diversion programs, rather than actually holding people accountable for car theft, is actually really successful in deterring said car thefts. But the thing is, we know that it's not. Again, even in areas where crime has gone down, even in areas where crime seems to be trending in the correct direction post the Black Lives Matter riots, the spike in auto theft is continuing, and that is true in Connecticut as well. Vehicular theft is up nationwide. It is because in part of this trend, but it's also because we've had this nationwide push to reduce consequences for juvenile offenders. And this woman, this advocate, is saying that we need to take that a step further and apply that to offenders under the age of 25. Now, I understand the whole thing about your brain not being fully developed and all that, but what you guys need to understand out there in the audience is that your peak offending years are ages 14 to 25. It's in and around this time frame. This is when most of the time people are committing murders, robberies, violent crimes, sexual assaults, all of that stuff strongly across all racial groups exists in this narrow time frame. And it is important to try to keep these people out of getting involved in crime in this particular time frame. But the idea that we would never punish people in the most likely age bracket to commit crime is ridiculous, absurd, and asinine in every possible way.
Diversionary opportunities.
Yep.
So in terms of car thefts and what you brought up at the top of this, we've seen the data that's come out, and we know that, for instance, the judicial branch has a really successful suspended sentence motor vehicle program where kids go through it and they're able to be diverted from the judicial system, have an opportunity to sort of restore any harm that was done, go through programming that's needed, have basic needs met, and they leave. That is it. End of story. That has a high success rate and a low recidivism rate for young people. We'd like to see more of that.
But that's the thing about these left-wing activists. They don't care about any of this data. They don't care about any of these arguments, and they don't care about crime at all whatsoever. Fundamentally, when they say defund the police, that is about getting rid of the institution of the police. When they say abolish it, they mean it. When they say get rid of prisons, abolish prisons, they also mean that, regardless of the consequences. So you have a woman right here being an advocate for an organization that is quite literally pushing for the most criminal segment of the population to not face any consequences in the face of rising crime, while telling you that midnight basketball will cure car thefts in the state of Connecticut, when we've tried these reforms across the country. And guess what? None of that is deterring the Kia boys. And the consequences of this, these vigilantes to bring this all back home.
The organizer, Archbishop Dexter Burke of Walk in the Light Church of God, says it says a lot about how many young people are getting involved.
It tells us that there's hope, that young people are tired of the same old traditional bull that we've been experiencing, and they're saying enough is enough, and they're rising up.
While Saturday morning's watch was accompanied by a community service event, most of the future patrols will happen when the sun goes down.
We'll be patrolling at night, so it's not just a one-time thing.
They're completely ambivalent about this, because if these people are effective in deterring crime with their civilian patrols, that's great. That only goes to buttress their argument that you don't need the police at all whatsoever, and if they get injured or anything like that, they can still blame the lack of resources in these particular areas, the lack of midnight basketball, and deflect off of the issue. So now you have average everyday citizens patrolling armed, and thankfully in the Hartford, Connecticut case, they're black citizens, so you're not going to end up in a situation where a white person ends up stopping a criminal and that gets deemed as evil white racism. And if they get injured, if they get killed, it doesn't matter, because all they want to do is continually push forward, which is why they lie to your face over and over again. You have a woman telling you that if you just put a 25-year-old man in a diversion program, you say that he's like a little baby, he can't be held responsible for his actions, he can't be convicted of anything, and then it was going to be totally fine and it's not going to create any problems. When we know for a fact that letting out repeat offenders leads to more repeat offenses.
It's going to be on a consistent basis.
Along the way, the group stopped at the scene of a homicide, which Archbishop Burke said led to these armed community patrols.
2 individuals got killed there, and we just decided it's too close to the church. Enough is enough. We can't allow it no more. That was the tipping point.
So again, while I do love these people's spirits, while I do love that they're responding to a murder that happened in their own community in such a positive way, they are trying to help out the community. I don't like that they're in a situation where they need to do this, because the institutions that, by the way, they spend a bunch of tax dollars on are refusing to do so due to these woke ideologues who would rather see chaos ensue than admit that they were wrong.
The brigade getting pushback from other groups in the capital city, including Hartford's mayor.
It's not the right thing for Hartford. We are a community that's faced such trauma that is trying to work together to heal, and we need all of our leaders, everybody who really cares about this city, to come together and try to heal as a community, not to inflict more violence, not to bring more weapons into this community.
But the group hopes to show the city this armed patrol could make a positive difference.
We need the police support, we need the city support, and we need the continued support of the residents here,
who, despite all evidence, never want to admit that there are just some bad people. There are people with a propensity to offend and to reoffend, and they should be removed from our society because, God forbid, they could consider any other possibility like self-accountability or personal responsibility when blaming the systemic systems or the systemic structures. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the state of Connecticut being overrun by vigilantes. Till next time.